Hey everyone, welcome back to theclinicaltrialsguru.com. Again, that website address for you is theclinicaltrialsguru.com. I am in our second studio, South Coast Clinical Trials, broadcasting live. And Don, my regular co-host, is not here. He's in San Francisco. He's at an investigator meeting. But nonetheless, we have an excellent guest on today. We like to bring you guys guests from all different aspects of clinical trials. We had study participants on, we've had study coordinators on, we've had principal investigators, we've had people involved with patient recruitment, just tons. Like throughout the entire spectrum of clinical trials, we try to bring you guests and experts. And today is no different. We have Patrick Stone. He is, and you guys will love this, especially those of you research professionals out there, an ex-FDA investigator. He's currently doing QA consulting. He's got his own website. He's going to tell you a lot about what he's currently doing. Patrick, welcome to the show. Thank you very much for coming on.
Thank you very much for having me, and to all your listeners, thank you for your time.
Now, let's talk about when you were an FDA investigator. Can you kind of let us know how long you were an FDA investigator for, and maybe what year you got started and what year you stopped doing that?
Sure, no problem. So August of 1998, I was hired to go to Houston, Texas, and become a consumer safety officer, or as you know them, investigators. And that was right after finishing my master's in biotechnology. And so pretty much right away, I got into clinical trials auditing. I mean, everyone has to learn food investigations because that's the basics of FDA. And, you learn your basic law and evidence. But in 1999, I took the bioresearch monitoring training and started reviewing institutional review boards, bioequivalence labs, clinical investigators, and sponsor audits. And I continued to do that for the next 4 years proficiently, and then became an international inspector. And for 8 years, started going all over the world reviewing clinical trials in South America, Europe, Canada, and working with our partners and helping train the Brazilian inspectors, the Argentinian ANMAT inspectors, and the Brazilian Anvisa. And then also I did parallel inspections with Health Canada. And this continued all the way up until last March. I separated with the FDA.
Oh, last March, so March 2010?
Right, and then I took 4 months and I wrote a book about my time at FDA, and to let my clients or prospective customers know my background, my history, and how I operate in a patient safety manner. And,
okay.
And then I started doing actual client audits and on-site QA for clinical trials, devices, and drugs.
As a consultant, right?
Right, as a consultant.
Oh, okay. Now tell us a little bit about, and we're definitely going to get into a lot of your career as an FDA investigator. Tell us a little bit about the book. What made you want to write it?
Well, here's a quick screenshot of that, and that's the title of the book, and it's available everywhere. I recommend the ebook myself because I produced this as an ebook. I mean, it has website links. I don't have a bibliography. I have a web link address. So my material comes directly from either FDA or the GAO or whatever I reference. It comes straight from the website. And basically, it's about my whole career at FDA, how you go from food and then into whatever proficiency, program area, device area, drug area. I pretty much stayed in the bioresearch area because there's so much bioresearch in Houston. It's number 2 almost in the nation. So there's a lot of clinical trials going on in Houston, Texas. And so it was also, for me, there's a lot of misconception about the FDA and misunderstanding about the inner workings. And there hasn't been a book before about the inner workings of FDA by an FDA person. There's been a lot of outside looking in, that type of deal.
Right.
But, someone that was in and did the work and swore the oath, those guys, they don't really write a whole lot of books like this. I mean, they'll write technical manuals. There's a lot of that, on computer validation, drug manufacturing validation systems. But a book that encompasses more of the touchy-feely stuff, the behind-the-kitchen door stuff that you don't really see. I wanted everyone to understand who their FDA investigator really is.
Now,
what training they go through.
What prompted the name Bubblegum Badge?
Well, I tell in the preface, pretty much what that means, and basically it means that for almost 100 years, FDA had regulatory oversight over, 90% of everything you do in a day, whether it's buying plates or knives or imported goods or cell phones, microwaves, laser emitting products, you name it, FDA pretty much regulates it. But they didn't have the actual legal authority until the Food Safety Modernization Act to do anything about that. They couldn't tell your company, hey, you've got to recall this. They had to politely ask, hey, could you please consider recalling this product? There's been some complaints or people have been hurt. So they just barely got their teeth for food. They still don't have any true regulatory authority over drugs, devices, and biologics. So they have a lot of oversight, but actual regulatory authority, real teeth, they really don't have it yet. And but it also goes along with when I first got into the FDA, it's a gold badge, and it's a really big gold badge. It's not a 10 badge or whatever. It's really huge. And I was like, wow, this thing is big, it's awesome. I'm going to be able to do, whatever I want, get away with anything. And a buddy of mine that had been in for a while, he works in the import division, he said, hey, don't think that Bubblegum badge is going to get you out of any trouble. It's more trouble than it's worth. So don't abuse it, because it's a lot of responsibility to hold a badge and to review patient records or review doctors' oversight of a clinical trial. That's a heavy responsibility that affects possibly millions of people.
Right.
So you can't take that lightly, and I never did.
Now, let's talk about when you first, became an FDA investigator. What was your typical day like? Did you go on audits every day, or was it weekly? What was your job like?
Well, so when I first got in, food audits are basically a weekly thing. I mean, you have to do 2 or 3 because they're fairly quick. I mean, you're in there 3-4 hours. You only have a couple hours to write the report. You're on to the next one. So, every week was a lot of work. But once you start getting into strictly doing clinical auditing or institutional review board audits, basically you have, 5 days to do the work and another 3 or 4 to do the report. I mean, the FDA gives you 30 days, and most people take 20 days. I never did. I mean, 3-4 days, the report's out, I'm on to the next one. So in a month, I would get to 2 clinical trials. Any more, and there's not enough preparation. You have to read the protocol. You have to understand what you're getting into. So,
right.
But the typical FDA auditor for bioresearch gets to 1.5 BIMOs a month.
Now, did you ever audit clinical trial sites in the drug space?
Oh, yes. Yes.
And so I imagine you started doing that later on in your career, going out to the investigative sites?
Well, not really. I mean, so I took the training to do the bioresearch work in '99. By 2000, I was on my own. I mean, you go out maybe 2 or 3 times, with a seasoned investigator so that they watch you and make sure you're not overstepping your bounds, or you know what you're doing, or you're following the compliance program guide, because everything is scripted. I mean, the FDA does everything by a playbook. The Code of Federal Regulations is all you can write as an observation. So you have to go by those scripted guides. You know, the compliance program policy guide should be everyone's playbook.
Right.
A lot of times industry likes to be novel and make up their own, but that usually gets them in trouble because they'll miss something, or, you know, you use a template, it's ready for you. Of course, that's the minimum, you know, like C work, that's what I call it, just the minimum passing grade for CFR, you know, compliance. You want to bring that up, you know, to B or A work. You want to build off of that model.
Now, how were you received by the research clinics when you came in for an audit? Were the audits always scheduled, or did you ever come unannounced?
Most of the time they're scheduled.
Okay.
You want to make sure that the staff is there that's necessary, the principal investigator, that all the individuals that need to be there are there right away, you know, at a reasonable time, at their schedule. You know, I tried not to have them, if they had surgery or they were doing clinic, you know, I would go around their schedule. I got to be there earlier, or I start my inspection a little later. But yeah, everything I would always call in. Now, there were times that it was unannounced, and those are for-cause audits, where either there's a complaint, or there's deaths, or there's a reason to go in there without anyone knowing, because you don't want to give any heads up, or
you don't want to give a
you don't want
heads
any
up.
doctoring of the records. You want
Right.
everything intact as is.
So what would constitute a for-cause audit?
Well, so if a patient calls FDA and says, hey, I have a complaint, or a sponsor calls in, or even if a sponsor removes the principal investigator from the site, that's pretty much an automatic FDA for-cause audit. There's a reason why a sponsor pulls you from a site, and it's usually non-compliant. So it's a pretty good indication that there's going to be problems, and FDA is going to check it out right away.
So okay, let me get this right. So a normal audit, a normal routine audit, you give the research clinic notice, usually 2 weeks, 4 weeks, I would imagine.
No, not that long. Usually like 5 days, 7 days. I mean, you don't want to give them too much lead time. I mean, you want a little bit of looking at the things contemporaneous. You know, you don't want them scrambling and rushing to try to get their queries in order or fix whatever you know, deviations there are.
So usually a matter of days.
Days, yes.
Yeah. And then you would send a
Unless
notice.
It's international. Now, the international inspections, they give them a whole month.
A month, okay. Now, would the FDA send a written notice that you will be audited in a few days, or do they just call? How does that work?
It's always a call. Never written. I mean, FDA doesn't like to send written stuff out.
Oh, okay, so it's a call.
It's always a call.
And then if there's, let's say the research clinic is just not answering, or you're just getting voicemail, would that just automatically go to a for-cause?
Yeah, we would just show up then on, you know, the date that we had planned, because here's how it works. You're given an inspection and you have time frames, and like for prescription drug user fee or MDUFA, or now with the biologics user fees, you have to meet that time frame. Otherwise, you know, you don't get paid your PDUFA monies. So, you know, FDA mandates that, hey, you've got to get this done by April or by March or by whatever quarter is necessary. And, you know, the centers, they disseminate all of those work plans. That comes from either the Center for Drugs, the Center for Biologics, or the Center for Device and Rad Health.
And then in the for-cause audits, because we have a lot of research professionals watching this, and you know, it's almost a nightmare in our world when we hear, oh, someone's getting an FDA audit. Not necessarily because we're all doing everything wrong, but it's just like when you see a police officer on the street. You know, nobody wants to get pulled over. So, what?
Well, there's a misconception there. I mean, I always told my customers, is what I call them, whether it was the director or chairman of the hospital. I mean, I'm talking heavy hitters, MD Anderson, Baylor, Texas Children's. Look, guys, I'm not the dentist. I'm not the IRS. I don't really have a whole lot of teeth. Now, we all have a vested interest in patient safety and effective healthcare, and it's all contractual. Once you sign the 1572 statement of investigator, or the in the device world, you sign the other contract, the statement of investigator in the non-1572 form. It's basically a contract with FDA, the PI, and the sponsor. Look, I'm going to follow all the CFR. I'm going to allow FDA in here, and I'm going to, go about my business. So it really shouldn't be a hair in the back of your head raising experience, because most investigators are knowledgeable, reasonable, and they have a bit of investigator discretion. So things can be a verbal as opposed to a written observation on a 43. Now, sometimes you're always going to have a 43. It's a matter of how severe is it? Does it affect patient safety, or is it a data integrity issue? Then I would be worried. I would be like, whoa, hey. And I've seen a bit of that, throughout my career. And now on the other side of the FDA, I see even worse things. I'm still seeing liquid paper usage and, transcription errors for primary efficacy, or inclusion-exclusion violations, and things that really shouldn't, be happening, either because of a monitor review or just the site itself taking the time to understand, okay, wait a minute, these things have to be precise. This isn't regular standard practice of medicine. That's an imprecise, or it has less precision to it than research. So it migrates, but yeah, for sure.
And then, so the for-cause audit, you just show up unannounced, and you usually get surprised people, right? They're
always surprised. What's this about? And is this a for-cause? And it's like, well, sometimes you can't answer it. Like if the inspection, if you're mandated to not say anything, sometimes you can't say anything. You just say, look, I'm here to look at this protocol. I need all the records right now. Thanks. And they're like, well, what's going on? Or, and then once you start reviewing the records and you see the violations or the issues, then you start asking questions and start saying, okay, do you have a waiver for this? Or is there a reason why you did this, violation? Or, this patient their SAE wasn't reported for 2 years. What's the deal? And, now they're calling us and they're making a complaint against your site. And that's when the interviews start, and if they have to do an affidavit, which kind of is a meaningless paper dog and pony show, because according to our legal guys in FDA, they always said, well, those affidavits aren't really used in court, or, they're not admissible. I guess because of, it's not done in front of a court reporter or something. I have no idea, but there's a legal reason for that. But most of the time, affidavits are documenting FDA legal authority, whether it's, through a shipment of a regulated product interstate, or a deviation in a contractual plan.
And so just on average, because I'm very fascinated by this, during any audit, the majority of the time, there will be a 483 issued, or is that not?
Well, I wouldn't. Okay, so if we're talking about bioequivalence or bioavailability, there's always going to be a 483 item.
Okay.
Those type of studies have all kinds of issues, and you have the center PhDs and pharmacists and PharmDs. They come in and help facilitate these trials. These investigations. The lead investigator is still the guy at the site, the district guy, but the center people, they're doing all the work, and they know all the tricks and all the miscalculations and all the validation snafus, and so there's always issues with those. And at at a clinic site, depending on the violations or the deviations that are reviewed, some of those are always going to be put on the 483, regardless of whether you report them or not. If they're a deviation from inclusion, exclusion that escalates to violation, that's more of a violation than a deviation. That'll just be the FDA investigator's playbook as to, okay, well, this is a 483 item. This one, you didn't follow the protocol here. And so pretty much whatever you write on your deviation log, except for like when patients miss their appointments, you can't control the patient, and FDA knows that. So they're not going to really hammer you for that type of deviation. They're going to hammer you more for something that is within your control as a clinic site. And it also depends on how much. Is it a 1%, 2%, one document, two, or is it half the patients?
Mm-hmm.
If it's a high percentage, it's automatically going on a 483. If
Right.
it's a low percentage, it may just be a verbal. It just depends.
Now, does the FDA ever issue fines to research clinics?
Well, that's interesting you bring that up. I mean, they're starting to issue fines more to sponsors
Okay.
and the people they control. And then I guess the sponsor can somehow, go back to the clinic side and say, hey, contractually, you didn't meet our obligations. I'm gonna need whatever money I gave you back or whatever.
Right.
But, FDA is definitely starting to get more aggressive with, let's say, contract research organizations, and they're starting to actually go after not only the company, because the company can't be put in jail, but it's starting to go after the managers that made the decision. So they're holding them more accountable for, let's say, if they hire lower quality workers, which is a very big problem right now. You have people with English majors and people that are not really qualified to be monitoring. They took a 1-week course and now they're somehow certified.
So why do CROs hire the? You're saying that this is common practice for them to hire?
Oh yeah. You see, and sometimes an English major or a literature major, maybe because of years of experience, maybe they're qualified somehow. But FDA wants to see the best of the best working on clinical trials, research, reviewing that. Whether it's a physician assistant, research nurse, just someone scientifically background, it doesn't have to, you don't have to be a PhD or MD, but, there is a certain amount of science to this.
Mm-hmm.
And so if you don't have a background in science, then you're probably not in the, go back and get your background in science and then come back and
Right.
join up. But,
And
the FDA is really going after these CROs and sponsors, because sponsors use their internal monitors. And a lot of times these internal monitors, they're not really up to it. They just don't. And I see it all the time.
Yeah, that's a good point you bring up, because I have not heard that yet, that the CROs...
They're getting hammered. The past 5 years, you'll see the metrics from FDA showing you how many more sponsor audits have happened, or CRO audits, and specifically focusing on monitoring, because monitoring, happens for a reason. You need course correction early. If your principal investigator is doing unblinded reviews of patients, and the protocol calls for a blinded assessment, then that course correction needs to happen within the first 2 months. Because I'm seeing where 2-3 years, the whole time it's being done wrong. There are unblinded assessments where the protocol is asking, and you can see these metrics all on FDA. They provide you with the most observation, the 43 observation most cited for principal investigator site, for an IRB, for a CRO. They bracket for every single different type of bioresearch monitoring program area.
Now, we're going to get into, because our audience, for whatever reason, they're very interested in this one investigator out of Texas, actually your neck of the woods, Binski, right?
Yes, Binski.
We're going to get into him, but I wanted to kind of lead into him with just in general, okay, because I've always wanted to ask an FDA investigator or an FDA auditor, how often or how much fraud actually goes on in clinical trials, from the site level, from the CRO level, Is it more than the public would expect or less?
Well, there's a bell curve for everything, okay? You know, life is somehow mirroring bell curve. So actual outright fraud where you intentionally mean to do something wrong, I would guesstimate, 15, 10, 20%, depending on, in a bad economy, people are going to cut corners. Maybe they're going to break some rules to save time, money, and their skin. So, I mean, that's just kind of how it goes. And with regard to actual fraud, I mean, I may right now have one of the biggest cases FDA has on its hands for fraud. It spans 5 years, thousands of drug products, thousands of studies, and there was outright fraud, from the employee standpoint. Now, the company itself didn't intend to be fraudulent, but people will, because they say, hey, I'm going to work on the weekend, I'm going to get overtime, triple time, double time, make up their own time. Mm-hmm. Well, these guys were saying, that these laboratory tests were being done on Saturday, Sunday, but they were really done maybe Wednesday or Thursday. Okay, and so
this was a research clinic, or
it's a bioequivalence lab. Yeah.
Oh, okay.
Globally in the world.
Wow.
And so it's a really big case, and so it's not really the company's fault, but they take the blame because it's their employees that did it. The employees are trying to get extra money, not realizing that they're putting in harm's way every study they're working on. I mean, the data integrity issues alone with not knowing, benchtop stability for certain products. So, they're dealing with human plasma and how much drug is in there. So there's a lot of things to consider. And when you say I do it on this date, but you really did it some other date, and you can't prove what date you did it, then you jeopardize the integrity of the whole trial. And this goes on and on for 5 years, and every trial, and this and that, and so things like that. I mean, they kind of overblow the whole fraud situation, because that's not really, like I said, the business didn't seek out to do that. It happened to them. But regardless of that, it's fraud, and so it makes it a bigger issue.
And then speaking of fraud, and I love this interview, we're probably going to have to do a part 2, because there's so much we can get into, and I really want my co-host Don here, because he can ask tons of questions that I just can't think of at the moment. But, I mean, there is just so many topics we can get into. And I know a lot of our audience members, like I mentioned this guy Binski before, you've been directly involved with those cases, is that correct?
That is correct. So Brzezinski won a case, a litigation between FDA in 1998, 1997, something like that. And it happened to be in Houston. Well, my boss at the time, she was directly involved with that case the whole time it was going on. So she basically handed me the torch and said, go get him, kid. And I'm like, well, who's Brzezinski, and why do I got to go get him? And so I read the case file, and I look at his science, forget about the man, for the case, and I said, why are you going after him? Why don't you go after his institutional review board that approves his study? And so they said, wow, okay, kid, I go after the IRB. Then you won't be able to approve his clinical trials anymore. And so I think it's not FDA that went after him. Medicare, Medicaid, the state, for insurance issues. I mean, the guy has if it was just one or two agencies going going after you, okay, maybe you're not such a bad guy. But if there are multiple agencies, state, local, federal, then maybe, not trying to stay. You can look at all this. His reports are available, his history, and my history documented with him is on, every report. You'll see my name, every warning letter. It'll be, Brzezinski got a warning letter, Patrick Stone, the guy. So, the history is long. I mean, it's like a 10-year history between him and I have nothing against him or his work. He works with these proteins that are called antineoplastins, and he at first derived them from urine at the Harris County prisons, and then and that was the main reason why FDA was going after this guy, because he wasn't really making sure that virally, bacteriologically, he wasn't going through GMPs for manufacturing, wasn't making sure this product was going to be okay to infuse into patients. So he did that for a while. Then he said, "Fine, you know what? I'll synthesize this protein and I won't derive it from, and I'll try to use GMPs." Okay, that's fine. So I still had to do some clinical trial audits on him, and a lot of his studies are super old. I mean, the patients have been there since the 80s. A lot of them already passed away. He just barely is able to bring on a few more patients a year, and the FDA kind of has him in a stranglehold through his IRB. And
so are they able to stop? Because I know he's still doing studies, and I know a couple minutes ago we were having a little bit of audio problems, but I know the background, and I'll let the audience know. Basically, it's not just the FDA that's after this guy. It's Medicare, different insurance agencies. So he's kind of getting audited, if you will, from many different agencies. It's not just the FDA, but so back to the IRBs. Now, you guys went after the IRBs. Were you able to actually stop him from doing studies for a while? Because I know he's still practicing.
Well, we stopped him from approving new studies, so he can't bring on any more new ones. And the old ones are being phased out. I mean, they're running their longevity. There's a shelf life for a new drug application, and he's reaching the threshold.
And then there's a lot of people that are out there that are very much pro Brzezinski, and he's got just as many that are anti Brzezinski. And from your experiences, and you've actually audited him, you've talked to his former employees.
That's correct.
What can you tell our audience about, your opinions on him?
Well, so I have gotten confidential informant information about Brzezinski, and people swearing to and attesting to alleged facts of shredding documents, manipulating data. Just those two aspects alone would steer me away from looking at him as a possible treatment option.
Wow. And is there anything you can do, or the IRBs can do, about charging study participants to join trials? Because usually that does not occur.
Well, so what he's charging for is on all his protocols, you have to have standard of care therapy first before you can receive his therapy. So he charges you for his standard of care therapy, which is, and you can get into his clinical trial. Because you can't enter this trial unless you have standard of care. So you're not really being charged for his research. You're being charged for his standard of care.
Okay, so you'll either receive his drug or the standard of care, and you've got to pay for one or the other.
Well, no. You start off with his standard of care. You don't start off with his research stuff.
Okay. Well, just, you know,
You have to undergo at least one phase.
okay. Yeah, we'll definitely have to do a part 2. We're getting a little bit of connectivity issues here, but there's just so much more to discuss about the FDA in general. You know, site audits, because we have a lot of researchers out there watching, and then how the FDA actually protects the patients or the study participants joining the trials. We're definitely going to have to get into much more of this, but Bubblegum Badge is the book. It is out. Is it on Kindle? Do you have a Kindle version? Patrick?
It's out. I mean, you can get it in your iBook or iPad or whatever. I mean, any kind of e-reader you have, it'll go right into it.
Very good. I'm gonna check that out, and we're definitely gonna have to schedule a part 2. So when we're done, we will get that set up so that we can ask you more questions. Because we've never had anyone from the FDA on, and you know, I'd want to get the connectivity issues fixed so we can do a part 2. But this was, I think, a very outstanding interview that we've had so far. And before we leave, I want to thank our producers. These are people who registered profile pages on our site. So the first 100 people that register a profile on the Clinical Trials Guru page get producer credit. And right now we have South Coast Clinical Trials, thank you. Sarah Elizabeth Siegler, thank you very much. And Resolve Research Solutions, thank you as well, all for signing up for profiles. And for anyone out there, whether you're a research clinic, whether you're a research service provider, you can be a consultant, anything. You can get a profile on there, get more exposure for your brand. And like I said, our interviews are seen by hundreds, if not thousands, every month. And what better way to get exposure for your clinic or yourself? Only $99 per year. Free interviews for anyone, and first 100 people to sign up get producer credit. So thank you again, SCCT, Sarah Elizabeth Siegler, and Resolve Research Solutions, and we'd like to see more of you guys sign up. Patrick, thank you. This was a great interview. We absolutely have to do a part 2, and we'll do that sooner rather than later, if that's okay with you.
That sounds great.
And the website, you have a website that's all about quality assurance?
Well, it's more about my blog and my qualifications and what kind of services I can offer you. Tradestone QA, and my email is patrick@tradestoneqa.com. And I'd love to hear from your clients and help any projects out with patient safety and product effectiveness in mind.
Yeah, we'll have the links all up there. And like I said, this was a fantastic amount of information we had here. Valuable information, whether you're a research clinic or a study participant or just anyone interested. This was absolutely fantastic, and we're going to have you on again maybe in a few weeks. Okay, Patrick?
Sounds great. Thank you very much.
And thank you all for watching. This is Dan Sfera from theclinicaltrialsguru.com. Take care.